Zola didn't go to the club looking for love. She went there to disappear. But when her eyes met the coldest pair of obsidian eyes in Seoul, she didn't realize she was looking at her own death, or her only reason to live. The neon lights of Seoul blurred into a hazy purple as Zola sipped her drink. She was a long way from Lagos, working a dead-end job and feeling invisible in a city that never slept. Then he walked in. Kenji didn't walk like a normal man. He moved like a predator who owned the floor. People parted for him like the Red Sea. He was the head of the most feared syndicate in Asia, but to Zola, he was just the first person in years who actually saw her. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. The tension between them was a physical weight, thick and heavy. He took her hand, and his skin was like ice, yet it sent a fire through her veins. He led her out of the club and into a black sedan that smelled of expensive leather and old secrets. Zola knew she should be afraid, but for the first time in her life, she felt protected by the very man the rest of the world feared. The night was a whirlwind of soft whispers and shadows. In his penthouse, high above the city, the world felt small. Kenji was a man of steel, but for those few hours, he let his guard down. He told her she was beautiful in a way that felt like a painful confession. She saw the scars on his back, maps of a violent life, and she kissed them. It wasn't just a one-night stand. It was two broken souls trying to glue themselves together in the dark. When the sun began to peek over the skyscrapers, the magic vanished. Zola woke up to find Kenji standing by the window, his suit back on, his face once again a mask of stone. He didn't look at her. He told her a car was waiting and she had to leave. No goodbye, no phone number. He told her that knowing him was a death sentence. He handed her a thick envelope of cash and told her to forget his face if she wanted to keep breathing. Zola left with her heart in her throat and tears stinging her eyes. She felt used, but more than that, she felt a strange, hollow ache. She did exactly what he said. She vanished. She took the money, bought a plane ticket, and flew as far away as she could. She ended up in a small, quiet town in coastal South Africa, hoping the ocean breeze would wash away the scent of his cologne. 3 weeks later, the morning sickness started. It wasn't just the flu, and it wasn't just stress. Zola sat on her bathroom floor, staring at 2 pink lines on a plastic stick. She wasn't just carrying a secret, she was carrying the heirs to a criminal empire. She was alone, broke, and hunted by a past she couldn't outrun. But as she touched her stomach, she made a vow: Kenji would never find them. Life in the village was hard but peaceful. Zola changed her name and worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over her head. She became the woman who never smiled, the mystery lady from the city. Every time a black car drove past, her heart stopped. She lived in a constant state of what if, watching the horizon for a man she hoped would never come, yet secretly dreamt of every single night. The twins arrived on a stormy night, a boy and a girl. She named them Kofi and Amara. The moment they opened their eyes, Zola gasped. They had her skin, but they had Kenji's eyes, sharp, piercing, and intelligent. They were beautiful, but they were walking evidence of the night she was supposed to forget. She realized then that she could never truly hide. His blood was literally running through the halls of her tiny home. As the years passed, the twins grew. Kofi was quiet and protective, always standing between his sister and any perceived danger. Amara was the light, full of questions and laughter. But they both noticed things other kids didn't. They were faster, smarter, and had a strange intensity. Zola watched them with a mix of pride and pure terror. She was raising tiger cubs in a sheep's meadow. Zola told them their father was a brave soldier who died in a war. It wasn't a complete lie. Kenji was always at war. But as the twins turned 5, they started asking questions she couldn't answer. Why don't we have any photos of him? Amara would ask. Why do you lock the door 3 times at night? Kofi would demand. Zola just hugged them tighter, praying the silence would protect them. In Seoul, Kenji had become a ghost. He had climbed to the very top, eliminating every rival, but his heart was a hollow chamber. He had searched for Zola for months after she left, though he told himself it was just to ensure she hadn't stolen any secrets. He never found a trace. He became more ruthless, more cold. His associates whispered that he had no soul left to lose. One day, a letter arrived at a small post office in South Africa. It wasn't for Zola, but it was about the area. A local developer was selling land to a massive international corporation, a front for the Korean syndicate. They were expanding their reach, looking for quiet places to hide assets. The world was shrinking, and the shadow of the dragon was finally reaching the tip of Africa. Zola saw the news on a dusty television in the village square. She saw the logo on the side of the construction trucks entering the nearby city. It was the same symbol she had seen tattooed on Kenji's chest that night. The color drained from her face. She grabbed the twins' hands and ran home. The past wasn't just catching up, it was building a house next door. Zola knew she had to leave again, but there was nowhere left to run. She had no money, and the twins were too old to just be bundled into a suitcase. She decided to stay quiet, to blend in, to be a ghost. But fate had other plans. Kofi, curious and bold, wandered near the new construction site one afternoon. He found a discarded electronic tablet and, with his natural tech genius, managed to turn it on. The tablet was linked to the syndicate's internal server. Kofi didn't know what he was looking at, but he saw a photo of a man who looked exactly like a grown-up version of himself. He saw Kenji. He showed the screen to Amara. "Look," he whispered. "It's the man from Mom's dreams." They didn't realize that by turning on the device, they had sent a GPS ping directly to the headquarters in Seoul. Back in Korea, an alert flashed on a security monitor. A high-level encrypted device, lost months ago, had been activated in a remote South African village. Kenji's right-hand man, a cold-blooded enforcer named Ryu, brought the news. Kenji didn't care about a lost tablet, but when the facial recognition software on the tablet's camera captured a blurry image of the boy holding it, Kenji's heart, which he thought was dead, began to beat. Kenji didn't send his soldiers. He went himself. He told his men it was a matter of security, but he knew it was a matter of the soul. He spent the long flight staring at the grainy image of the boy. The eyes. He would know those eyes anywhere. They were his eyes, but filled with a light he had lost decades ago. He felt a mixture of rage that she had hidden them and a desperate, terrifying hope. Zola was hanging laundry when the black SUV pulled up the dirt path. She didn't need to see the license plate. She felt the air change. She tucked the twins behind her as the door opened. When Kenji stepped out, he looked like a king from another world. The village fell silent. He looked at Zola. Then his gaze dropped to the two children clutching her skirt. The silence lasted an eternity. Kenji didn't look angry. He looked shattered. Amara stepped out from behind Zola's legs. She wasn't afraid. She walked right up to the man who led the most dangerous organization in the world and touched his hand. "Are you the soldier?" she asked softly. Kenji dropped to his knees, the gravel crunching under his expensive suit. He couldn't speak. Zola stepped forward, her voice trembling but her eyes fierce. "You told me to forget you," she whispered. "I tried. But they wouldn't let me." Kenji looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw tears in the eyes of the mafia boss. "I didn't tell you to forget," he rasped. "I told you to survive. But I never knew I was surviving for this." The reunion wasn't a fairy tale. Kenji's arrival had drawn attention. His enemies, always watching for a weakness, had followed him. They didn't see a father, they saw a target. That night, as Kenji sat in Zola's tiny kitchen, the reality of their situation set in. He was the most powerful man in Seoul, but here, he had brought a death sentence to the only people he ever loved. "You have to leave," Zola pleaded. "If you stay, they will kill us all." Kenji looked at his children sleeping on the small cot in the corner. "If I leave you unprotected," he countered. He realized his life of crime had built a cage that now trapped his family. He made a choice then, a choice to burn his empire to the ground if it meant keeping the twins safe. Ryu, Kenji's loyalist, arrived with news. A rival faction had already touched down in Johannesburg. They knew about the children. The one-night stand was no longer a secret. It was a leverage point. Kenji had to move them. He decided to take them back to Korea, not to his palace, but to a hidden fortress. Zola refused. I won't let them become like you, she hissed. They are already like me, Zola, Kenji said, pointing to Kofi, who was awake and watching them with a calm, calculating gaze. Look at him. He's not afraid. He's planning. He needs to know how to survive the world I created. Zola looked at her son and realized Kenji was right. The twins weren't just hers. They were the legacy of a bloodline that didn't know how to lose. The attack came at dawn. Smoke grenades shattered the windows. Men in masks swarmed the small house. But they didn't expect Kenji. He fought like a demon, protecting Zola and the kids with a ferocity that left the floor stained red. He wasn't a boss giving orders. He was a father protecting his cubs. In the chaos, Zola grabbed a kitchen knife, defending Amara with a primal scream. They barely made it to the armored car. As they sped away, the small house, the only home the twins had ever known, went up in flames. Amara cried, but Kofi just watched the smoke. He reached out and took Kenji's hand. It was the first time they had touched since the village. Kenji gripped the boy's hand so tight his knuckles turned white. I've got you, he promised. I've got all of you. They reached a private airstrip. As the plane climbed into the sky, Zola looked down at Africa disappearing beneath the clouds. She was going back to the place she fled. She was a mother, a runaway, and now the queen of a man who was at war with the world. She looked at Kenji, who was watching the twins sleep. He looked older, tired, but for the first time, he looked like he had a purpose beyond power. Returning to Seoul was like entering a lion's den. Kenji hid Zola and the twins in a mountain estate, guarded by his most trusted men. But the elders of the syndicate were unhappy. They didn't want an outsider and 2 half-blood children inheriting the throne. They demanded Kenji get rid of them to prove his loyalty to the organization. Kenji's response was a single word: no. The tension reached a breaking point. A coup was staged. Kenji's own generals turned against him, led by a man who wanted the throne for himself. They kidnapped Zola during a brief moment of vulnerability. They sent Kenji a video. Zola in a chair, a gun to her head. The message was simple: give up the leadership and the children or the woman dies. Kenji didn't call his army. He knew most had betrayed him. Instead, he went to the basement of the estate. He opened a locker he hadn't touched in years. Inside was the gear of a lone assassin. He looked at Kofi. Stay with your sister. Don't open this door for anyone but me or your mother. Kofi nodded, his young face hardened with a gravity no child should have. Kill them all, Dad, the boy whispered. The final confrontation happened in an abandoned shipyard. Kenji moved through the shadows like a ghost, taking out guards one by one with surgical precision. He was a man possessed. When he finally reached the room where Zola was held, he was covered in blood. None of it his own. The rival boss laughed. You'd lose everything for a one-night stand, he mocked. It wasn't a one-night stand, Kenji said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in the room. It was the only night I was actually alive. In a blur of motion, Kenji disarmed the boss. But instead of killing him instantly, he looked at Zola. She stood up, took the gun from Kenji's hand, and looked her captor in the eye. She wasn't the scared girl from Lagos anymore. She pulled the trigger. They returned to the estate as the sun rose. The syndicate was in shambles, the traitors purged. Kenji called a meeting of the remaining loyalists. He stood before them, not as a cold tyrant, but as a father. He introduced Kofi and Amara as his heirs. He announced that the syndicate would no longer deal in blood. They were going legitimate. He was choosing his family over his empire. Years later, a beautiful woman and a powerful man stand on a balcony overlooking Seoul. 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl, are practicing martial arts in the garden below. Kenji hands Zola a glass of wine. Do you regret staying? He asks. Zola smiles, looking at a small, hidden safe in the corner. Inside is the original envelope of cash Kenji gave her years ago, untouched. I never needed the money, Kenji, she says. I just needed to know you'd come for us. Just then, Kofi walks in, holding a folder. Dad, he says, his eyes glowing with that familiar obsidian fire. I found the people who sent those men to the village 10 years ago. They think they're safe. They're wrong. The cycle of peace was a lie. The twins weren't just heirs to a fortune. They had become more dangerous than their father ever was. The peace Zola had prayed for was a fragile glass floor, and it finally shattered. Kofi wasn't just Kenji's son. He was his shadow. At 15, he had decrypted files that even Kenji's top hackers couldn't touch. He discovered that the attack on their village years ago wasn't just a rival gang. It was orchestrated by a secret council of international bankers who funded the mafia. They saw the twins as glitches in their global system of control. Kofi didn't tell his mother. He began to build his own digital empire in the dark, preparing for a war his father thought he had already finished. Amara, meanwhile, became the face of the family's legitimate business. She was elegant, charming, and moved through Seoul's high society with ease. But she carried a hidden blade in her garter and a coldness in her heart for anyone who looked at her mother with disrespect. She saw the way the elite looked down on Zola's African roots, and she used her father's influence to systematically bankrupt every person who whispered a slur. The twins were a perfect storm. Kofi was the silent weapon, and Amara was the public executioner. Zola saw the change in her children and felt a deep, gnawing guilt. She had brought them to this world to save them, but she feared she had lost their souls to the concrete jungle of Seoul. She confronted Kenji in his study, the room filled with the smoke of a cigar. "They are becoming monsters, Kenji," she cried. Kenji looked at his hands, scarred and aged. "They aren't monsters, Zola. They are survivors. The world is coming for them, and I won't be here forever to stop it. They have to be ready." The threat materialized when an international warrant was issued for Kenji's arrest, based on new evidence leaked by the council. It was a trap to pull him out of his fortress. As the police swarmed the estate, Kenji realized his legitimate life was a trap. He was being squeezed by the law on one side, and assassins on the other. He prepared to surrender to save Zola and the kids, but Kofi stepped into the light of the sirens. The boy held a single tablet and pressed a button. Every light in Seoul went out. In the darkness, the power shifted. Kofi had hacked the city's grid and the police communication lines. He spoke into a headset, his voice calm and terrifyingly cold. "This is not a surrender," the teenager announced to the authorities. "This is a negotiation. You will leave my family alone, or I will delete the bank records of every politician in this country." Kenji watched his son in awe and horror. The student had surpassed the master. The police retreated, but the council sent their best hitmen under the cover of the blackout. The mountain estate became a battlefield. This time, Zola didn't hide. She grabbed a shotgun and stood side by side with Kenji at the top of the marble staircase. They fought like a king and queen defending their castle. Amara moved through the shadows of the hallway, taking out assassins with a silenced pistol, her face as expressionless as a doll's. The family was a unit of death, bound by blood and the memory of a small village in South Africa. They weren't just a mafia family, they were a force of nature. When the sun rose over a quiet, blood-stained estate, the council realized their mistake. They had tried to kill a man, but they had birthed a dynasty. Kenji stood in the wreckage, looking at his family. They were all alive, but they were changed. Zola looked at her husband, her dress torn and her hands shaking. She realized that happily ever after didn't exist for people like them. There was only alive for now. The family decided to go off the grid entirely. They didn't need the palace or the titles. Kenji faked his own death in a massive explosion that convinced the world the Korean mafia boss was finally gone. To the public, the African lady and her twins disappeared into the smoke. In reality, they moved to a private island off the coast of Madagascar, a place Kenji had bought years ago with the money Zola thought he was spending on war. On the island, life returned to a version of normal. Zola planted a garden that reminded her of home, and Kenji finally traded his suits for linen shirts. But the scars remained. Every evening, they sat on the porch, watching the Indian Ocean. They were the richest people on Earth, yet they lived like simple villagers. The twins, now young adults, ran the family's global interests from a high-tech bunker hidden beneath the sand. They were the ghosts that ran the world's markets, ensuring their parents were never disturbed. One afternoon, a small boat approached the island. It wasn't an assassin, it was an old woman from Zola's village in South Africa. She had been sent by the village elders with a gift, a jar of soil from the land where the twins were born. Zola wept as she held the earth. It was a reminder that no matter how far they ran or how much blood was spilled, their roots were unbreakable. She realized that her one-night stand hadn't just given her children, it had given her a life of incredible, painful, beautiful purpose. Kenji approached Zola and took her hand. He looked older, his hair silver at the temples, but his eyes were full of a softness only she ever saw. "I never told you why I chose you that night," he whispered. Zola looked at him, curious after all these years. "It wasn't just your beauty," he said. "It was the way you looked at the world like you didn't owe it anything. I wanted to be near that kind of freedom." Zola smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "We're free now, Kenji." The twins joined them on the beach. Kofi looked at his father and gave a rare, genuine smile. "The council is gone, Dad. I finished it today." The last threat had been neutralized. The war was finally over. The boy who was once a secret in a South African village was now the most powerful shadow in the world, but here, on this sand, he was just a son. Amara hugged her mother, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. As the sun set, casting a deep orange glow over the water, the camera pans back to show the family standing together. They are a blend of two worlds, two cultures, and 1,000 heartaches. They started as a mistake in a nightclub and ended as an empire of love. The story of the lady who vanished wasn't a tragedy, it was a legend of survival. They had outrun the mafia, the law, and time itself. The final shot is of a small wooden sign at the edge of their property. It doesn't have a family name or a warning. It simply says, "Home." The screen fades to black as the sound of the waves drowns out the ghosts of the past. The African lady didn't just come back with twins. She came back with the power to change her destiny, proving that love, even when born in the dark, is the only thing that can truly light the way.